Hello, and welcome to the show, Living with Climate Change. And this is the first episode of Season 2, I'm calling it, because I'm kind of at a new location. And I made about 8 shows on the last season. So, welcome. Today's show is going to be about a little bit about science, just general science. And the name of the show is The Nature of Clouds. And I hope you stay with me, at least go to the end of this show. And because I have a montage of videos and pictures to music of clouds and cloud formations, and it's quite stunning, I think. So please watch that at least. But I'm going to just talk about clouds that I love so much and how they form. And I think that it also will educate us more about the atmosphere, and more, so it will lead to more appreciation of the atmosphere. It's also a lot of fun, and they're beautiful. And I think of clouds as another part of nature, really, like the mountains and animals and plants and trees and birds, and there's the clouds, and they're really part of nature, even though they're really just made out of water. But they change and they form, and they're very interesting. And I just love the sky also, the openness of it, and the atmosphere, and maybe future shows I might talk a little bit about astronomy. I think I want to maybe go out into space and just appreciate the wonder of our world and our cosmos. So let me right away, I want to show you a magnificent picture. And it's called a cloudscape. Instead of a landscape, it's a cloudscape. But it's a magnificent picture, and I've referenced the photographer. I got it from Wikipedia. And it's from 2006, and it's around Victoria, Australia. But it's an amazing picture, so let me show you that right now. Okay, so I mean, if the picture is that dramatic, you can imagine seeing that in real life would be something else. So I hope today it won't be boring to you. I think that, you know, when we have science in school and we're forced to learn it, it's one thing, but I think once you get out of school and science, just general science, can become quite interesting. As you know, that's kind of one part of the show I have. And so let's get right into a little bit about the types of clouds and how they form and their importance to life on Earth. And okay, so there's so many names for clouds that it gets to be too much. But let's just look at the 3 types of clouds that are called. There's 3 of them. Is called cirrus, stratus, and cumulus. Now, cirrus clouds are usually the ones that high up, and the word comes from like hair, flowing hair, stringy type clouds that are, and sometimes they're made of ice, and they're high up in the troposphere usually, and some go up into the stratosphere, some clouds, but most clouds are in the troposphere. And stratus, well, that word comes from meaning layers. stratum. They're just more layered type clouds that, might be a cloudy day, or you can see them spread out across the sky. And then the third type are my favorite, are cumulus, and they're the very dramatic convective type clouds, puffy, popcorn, cotton ball looking clouds, and they can go up high into the atmosphere. But those are the ones that kind of going to talk about today that I like to watch so much, and they're beautiful. So now when we talk about clouds, we're talking about, I've talked about the carbon cycle in another video, talking about CO2 in the atmosphere and how that was part of the carbon cycle. Today, so there's another cycle called the water cycle, and then we have the nitrogen cycle. And those are kind of the main cycles, physical cycles that give life on Earth. There are many other cycles, of course. But let's look at the water cycle. And clouds are a big part of it. Now, what drives these cycles? Well, it's the sun. This magnificent ball of energy we see is the reason for all life, and everything goes back to the sun. So the sun creates the water cycle. Now let's go through quickly the stages of how a cloud forms. So we have water. So water is on Earth. We know that, in the seas and the rivers and the lakes. It's in the soil. It's in plants. And so the sun heats up the water. And we know from basic chemistry that all matter has three states of liquid, gas, and solid. So the sun heats up water when it's in a liquid state, and it changes it to gaseous state, water vapor, invisible water vapor. And that is through evaporation. So water evaporates, changes state, and the water vapor goes into the atmosphere. Now or the air. And we know from an earlier show of mine that the atmosphere is oxygen, nitrogen, O2 and N2. So now we have H2O, gas, going up into the air. And so it rises up, and that's from, a kind of a complex cycle of events, changes, that is related. It's called adiabatic cooling. But we know that water vapor has a lower molecular mass than nitrogen and oxygen. So it's less dense. So it has the ability to rise up. And it rises up through this term we call buoyancy. And so there are adiabatic cooling, and other things happen, wind and upwinds and things that make the water vapor rise up. And so and we know as you go up in the troposphere that the temperature drops. So the water vapor, through adiabatic cooling and buoyancy, starts to rise up in a gaseous state. And when all the conditions are right, as it goes up, it will change back into a liquid, into water droplets, through condensation. So it changes back, but it's up in the sky, it's up in the troposphere, and through updrafts and things like that, we won't go into all these things that happen, it forms a cloud. And we think of clouds as an aerosol, because there's salts and particles up there that the water, the cloud nuclei, vapors, water vapors adhere to these things and forms these clouds. And so that's what happens, and all of it accumulates together, and we get these. And sometimes these cumulus clouds are amazing, how they're just they look so dense, and the outlining of the cloud is so vivid against the blue sky. Sometimes it's just amazing. But that's what happens. And so then through the sun again creates wind, and it moves the clouds. And then when conditions are at a certain way again, that it will rain and the water will drop down back onto the earth. And this is how the water cycle moves water around the world and nourishes crops and plants and animals and fills up lakes and rivers and all this. And so that's kind of the way it works. So it's very interesting. Now let me show you a video of clouds and it's in fast motion. So it's kind of cool to see the clouds forming, and these are cumulus clouds. So let's look at this short video right now. Okay, so that's clouds, and that's how clouds form, and they're part of our water cycle, very important. Now let's talk about, let me ask you the question, why are clouds white? Well, let's go back to the sun. So we have the sun, and it's putting off all this energy, and we know a lot about it, and we know about the electromagnetic radiation that comes off it. And you've maybe heard of the electromagnetic spectrum. Let's take a look at that just real quick so I can reference you to that. Now, so the sun, when the visible spectrum hits the clouds, it hits these water molecules, and the water molecules are large enough that it will scatter the entire light spectrum. So if you see the whole light spectrum at once, it will be just pure white. So that's why the clouds seem that look white, and the spectrum, light spectrum, comes and goes into our eyes, the rods and cones, and we process it to our brain, and that's what we see. And the reason that the sky is blue sometimes, especially on very dry conditions, is that we're seeing the light spectrum scattered by oxygen and nitrogen molecules that are smaller, and they only scatter the blue and violet spectrum of light. So that's why we see that. And sunsets that have all the different colors you can imagine. It's because of the aerosols and things that are in the sky are scattering different wavelengths of the light spectrum. So that's why clouds are white, and that's why they form, and they're part of our water cycle, and they're very important. And I hope you enjoyed the little talk on it. I love, science, just even at the simplest levels, is just so interesting. And so I hope I hope you enjoy this little talk. And now here in a minute, I've compiled this montage of just incredible pictures of clouds and some videos that are in fast motion, and it's to some nice music. And so we're going to go out with this on this kind of a short show, introduction to the nature of clouds. And okay, so let's watch this little montage together. Thank you for joining me, and I hope to see you on the next show. Bye.